Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive, the podcast that skips small talk and goes straight for the concepts that shape our thinking and behavior. In this podcast, cold expertise is defenestrated as warm philosophy is enthroned in an attempt to explore the field in which we're all scientists looking for answers, living well. Hello world, welcome to another deep dive with Eyal Shai. Today I'm joined by Visa. Hi Visa.
Hey, yeah. Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you here. And without further ado, what is the subject that you've chosen for our conversation today?
Right. So today I'm going to be talking about what I call the library ethos, which is a way of being and a way of experiencing reality and interfacing with reality through the lens of the idea of the library, basically, at every scale. Yeah.
That's lovely. And there's so much to unpack there, exactly because it's not the usual concept that we go around having in mind. I know you already mentioned in the past, and I'd like you to start the journey in your childhood, if you'd like. Is the library a place that you feel emotionally connected with since forever?
Yeah, exactly. So even before my mom, so my mom was the person who brought me to the library, but even before that, I recall both of my parents reading. And neither of them are, like very educated. Neither of them are like intellectuals, but they both just like reading. My father likes reading about history, and my mom likes reading like old literature, like what did she read? She read like Great Expectations, Jane Eyre, that sort of thing. And so I have this mental image of my parents in bed, both of them with their bedside lamps on and both of them reading. And it's kind of a comforting image for me. Like I just think of my parents that way. And the thing is, I do have siblings and none of my siblings read very much. So I kind of seem to be the only one in my family, apart from my parents, who really picked up reading and kind of turbocharged that and went crazy with it. So even in my parents' home, there were, we had like these bookshelves that were full of books. I'm not even sure where they got their books or when they went shopping or whatever. But so even at home, there were always books to read. And when my mom brought me to the library, I was like, whoa, there's so many books and it's free. I would take my library card, my mom's library card, my brother's library card. I'll check out like 12 or 16 books at a time. And I remember my mom, after we would go to the library, we might go to eat somewhere, and I would maybe Burger King or McDonald's or something, and I would be eating while reading a book, and then I'll be reading a book on the bus on the way home, and I just kept reading. It just seems so exciting to me, like all this knowledge that every book is a gift from some author to the world, and so it's a gift to me and it's free, right? And I was learning about ancient history, learning about Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, volcanoes. There was this book encyclopedia set called Charlie Brown's Encyclopedia. I think my mom got it for me. Or my dad, I don't know. My mom's a big Charlie Brown fan. But anyway, that book had like stuff about space and the bones in the body and cells and like carnivorous plants. And I was just learning all this. I was like maybe 5 or something. And it was just this whole world was amazing to me. And so I was always reading, always learning. And so when I went to school felt like a betrayal almost. It felt like, so in comparison to being a self-directed nerd reading whatever he wanted from the library, enduring school felt like torture. And I think, for some time when I'm talking with people and I describe how painful school was for me, they're like, but it's not that big a deal. I just sit in class and nothing happens. And it took me a while to realize that it probably didn't bother them as much because they weren't obsessively thinking about the next book that they wanted to read but couldn't because of class. Right, so it's like the opportunity cost of school for me was much higher.
Exactly, they didn't know what they didn't have a specific alternative in mind. Yeah, first of all, I'm just like you. So at 5, I was a voracious reader of even newspapers, which is really weird. Like in Israel, you'd get all the terrible news, and I would just be there humming as well as I was reading. I don't know if you were doing that, but always humming for some reason.
I would get in very weird positions. I'd be like lying on the chair like this, upside down, and like lying on the floor, and it's very embodied. It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there is nothing better to highlight the importance of libraries to me as well, because when I think about historical events, I can easily forgive any sort of burnt temple. Like, I know this might be offensive to people who are of the religion,
Yeah.
that gets that done. But um, the one thing that does annoy me very much that ever happened was the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Like, that does not could not be forgiven. Just imagine all the amazing books and writings that went there, never to be seen again or be materialized again. Um, yeah, so I definitely agree with you there. Now, what about the part of the ethos? Like, how does that
Mhm.
come into mind? Is it also something that started in your youth or later on?
I think so this took a while to piece together because I didn't really have a concept for what I was doing. But so the story, to continue with the story, is like I was reading a lot, yeah. And so it felt like family to me, right? Like my books, I mean, I never explicitly articulated that, but like books were my universe, literally. Like it's just the way that I interface with the world. And I guess at some level, I knew that I wanted to be a part of that process. And I didn't explicitly think I want to be an author. I think part of that is because I didn't directly have any exposure to anybody in my life who was an author. So it's like vaguely, I might have read, I think I would have read books about how to become an author. So I knew like the words. I knew they would say, oh, write a manuscript, a draft, find a publisher, find a editor, find a, like an agent to ship your draft around to an editor. Like I could say those words, but because I didn't actually have any such experience around me in my life, it just seemed kind of abstract and like wasn't going to happen. Like I did want to become a magazine writer. Like I did remember when I was about, and this is a bit older, I was about 17, I would skip school and I would go and hang out in the libraries to do my homework, ostensibly. But instead of doing my homework, I would pick up a stack of magazines and I'll be like, oh, I'll start doing my homework once I've read a little bit. And I just spend the whole day just reading magazines. Like this is like GQ, Esquire, all those like, I was becoming a man, right? As an adolescent boy. And I wanted to learn more about like, what do men care about and stuff like that. And I enjoyed that as well. I felt like that was my introduction to just adult reality. Like I remember in Men's Health, I think there used to be this section by this guy called Jimmy the bartender, and he would just give advice. Like people, it's an advice column, and people would be like, I'm divorced, and how do I make contact with my my new wife's children? Like how do I be a good dad to them? And he just read really thoughtful, passionate advice. He's like, you can never replace the old dad, but you can make space for them. And it's just so nourishing to read compared to going to class and sitting in lecture theaters like, oh, what's this nonsense? And I knew that I wanted to be a part of that process. And but again, I think, and by this time, to go back a bit, when I was about 10, 7, 8, 9 ish, I discovered the internet, and to me, the internet was like, holy shit, this is like the library, but I can directly interface with it. So with books, I don't know how I'm going to publish a book when I'm 7. But when I was 10, I'm like, oh, you can set up a website of your own and you can write pages in Notepad and then in HTML files and then upload that. And then you have a website and you can introduce people to your website. You can post links around. So for me, the internet was like, wow, it's a hypertext library that I can directly publish in. I don't need an editor. I don't need a publisher, agent, whatever. And so, yeah, I fell in love with the internet, which to me, I interpreted as this is a super library, right? Hyper library. And I made my own website. I had like links to my favorite game website pages and, FAQs and jokes and images and stuff. And I had a guest book. And I just really loved that. And I think that became my new sort of frame of reference. Like I just love the internet so much. I was discovering music around this time when I was about 17. I was playing it. Wanted to form a band, and even then, like MySpace was a thing, and so I made a MySpace page for my band. Like we met through friends of friends, and there's like this Singaporean local music forum called soft.com.sg, which stands for Sound of Friends Together. It's very cheesy, but yeah, it's just I developed a sense of community with the other musicians on that forum, and so it's just all of that was just the activity that really excited me, and me. I would like come back from school and I would rush to the computer and be like, what's the latest on soft.com? What's the latest on this forum? Has anyone signed my guest book? Like those are all the things that was how I kind of punctuated my life. It's almost like there's this civilian life that I have to live because of my parents and society and whatever, and then my real life. So when I watched The Matrix, I was like, ooh, like Neo. It's like I felt like Neo in a sense. He's like he has this Mr. Anderson life, but his real self is Neo. Like, and I related to that. And yeah, so I would spend a lot of time online on forums. When Reddit came around, I would get on Reddit. When Quora came around, I'd get on Quora. I've just always been very actively participating in every online space that would have me, which to me just felt completely normal and obvious. And it took me a while to understand that, oh, actually most people on the internet are lurkers. They don't post anything. They just kind of use it as like an entertainment scrolling interface. And for me, it's like, no, it's like I've always wanted to participate and give back and kind of be like that. And yeah, so I kept blogging. And around like 2010, so I started blogging because like some of my classmates were also blogging. So we were almost using blogs like a early proto Facebook. Like we just talk about today at school, this happened, and then after school, I went to my friend's house and we played video games, and that's a blog post. And we enjoyed, like just commenting on each other's blog posts and that sort of thing. And then one day I found a live journal community which was about Singaporean live journalists. And I was like, ooh, here's like a live journal system is like there are pages and you can you can submit your post to the page. And I was like, ooh, let's like a local live journal. Let me submit some of my local thoughts. And so I wrote like this kind of cute rant about how Singaporeans are so materialistic and can't we be more kind to each other? Can't we have more joy in our lives and be less money minded and that sort of thing? And I got I think 12 comments, which blew my mind. I was like, holy shit, 12 comments! Like I've made it in the world.
You're
12
star.
people. Exactly. And I'm like, I'm gonna do more of that. And so I did do that. I started writing more and more like local political commentary, news commentary. There was one moment where there was something in local news that I was angry about. Because, initially I was just kind of annoyed because I thought they were presenting the statistics in the wrong way. So it was like for our school leaving examination. So like when you graduate from primary school to go to secondary school, there's an examination you take. And they were saying, and so in Singapore, like 84%, something like 80% of, might be close to 86, some 84 to 86% of people live in public housing, which is like apartment. So wow. I'm in a public housing flat right now. And it's good. It's like high quality apartments that's like subsidized by the government. And then there's private housing, which is like like big bungalows, like wealthy people live in private housing that's takes up a lot of space. And they were saying, the news article was saying, oh, almost half or around half of no, I think it's more than half. Yeah, a little bit more than half of top scoring PSLE students come from public housing. I'm like, and they were framing it as like a feel good story, like, oh wow, half of the top scorers are not rich. And I'm like, but if you flip the table,
that's not a good number.
Yeah, it's like so it's like something like 18% of people live in private housing, but they represent like 50+%, exactly, 50-ish% of, right? So I'm like, hey guys, like your statistics are kind of misleading because you're doing that. And then what they did was, and I think I kind of attack them a little bit. I was like, what are you doing? Like the way you're presenting the stats is all wrong. You're misleading the public. You should, if you flip it. And then they kind of like muted my criticism when they posted it. They were like, oh, you can look at statistics this way, or you can also look at statistics that way. There are many ways of looking at statistics. That's how they frame my thing. Which now, like as an adult, I'm like, oh, the press is, in cahoots with the government to present the national narrative. Okay, I get it now. I get it now. But at the time, I was like, oh my God, how dare they twist my words, right? Like, and I posted like a very angry article about how the news media was misleading the public, and that went for its time, it went kind of viral. It was like posted on multiple forums and everything. And I was like, the power, like I feel so like I'm correcting an injustice in the country. That's what I felt like at the time.
Yeah.
And at that, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you if the ethos, when you speak about the library ethos, you mean that it's an ethos for each and every one of us to adopt on an individual level.
Mhm.
It's like an ethos
Right.
that you have that you are trying to live by your life. Is that is the participation that you're talking about in all these
Right.
platforms?
Yeah. So I would say that there's a spectrum, right? So obviously not everybody is going to become a historian or a journalist or an author. I think how I frame it. So I guess I think of it almost as like there might be successive layers of it. And so some people will, when they hear about this sort of thing, what I expect and what I've seen happen is that it makes something click for them. It's like they are already kind of like that, but they don't quite know it yet, or they haven't found the words to frame it in that way. Like they've already been reading a lot, they've already liked to write, but they've never kind of pieced it all together into a coherent way of seeing the world. And so when I do that for them, like it almost unlocks their potential and power, because they're like it releases a lot of tension. They realize, oh, this is how I am, and there are other people like me, and we should make friends, and we should kind of respond to each other and share each other's stuff and all that. So for those people, so I'm mainly writing this for those people. I'm mainly articulating the ethos for those people. But it's like, another way of thinking about it is like, imagine I'm an advocate for humor, right? It's like you can be a stand-up comedian who's like a professional who can go on
Mm-hmm.
stage for 3 hours and make an entire paying audience laugh, which is excellent. But like, not everyone's going to be a professional comedian. But that doesn't mean you can't, inject a little bit of humor into your like meetings or into your speeches, your best man speech or your eulogy or whatever. Humor is a precious asset, a precious kind of um, just energy to bring into all human interaction, right? And like
Absolutely.
some people are just kind of not so funny, right? Some people just don't enjoy humor, and some people love it. And I guess I just want people to consider like the degree to which um, art and music and poetry and literature has enriched their lives. And if you're not going to become a professional author or a professional, any of those things, that's fine. Not everyone needs to be everything. But it's also a bit of a plea to like support your local writers, support your local journalists, support your local historians. Like we all benefit from that enterprise. I think there's this great quote from Ethan Hawke, and he's talking about art. So he's an actor, and he was saying something like, most people don't really care that much about poetry. I don't know if he's saying poetry specifically, but I think he was talking about poetry. It's like day to day, you just live your life. You're not like hungry for poetry until, someone you love passes away, or you have a horrible breakup, and then, and like just some tragedy. And then you ask yourself, like, has anybody ever felt as horrible as I feel right now? And
Mm.
then you find some poetry that really speaks the beauty of that experience, and you feel less alone. And so in that moment, so like 9,999 days out of 10,000 days of your life, you don't even think about it. But on that day where your mother dies or something horrible happens, like you just need something to help you process. And then the artist who was there, who was working on his craft all along, has exactly the thing that you need to hear. And that's beautiful. And it should be appreciated. I do think it's underappreciated most of the time. It's like, it's kind of like insurance, or just there are these things where if you don't need it every day, it's not so obvious, and you don't think to pay
Yeah,
for
like
it or
like
whatever.
a tow truck, right? A
Yeah,
a
exactly.
poet is a
Exactly.
tow truck
That's true.
operator.
That's poetic. Yeah, that's very true. I think so. Yeah. You don't normally think of tow trucks, but when you need one, you really need one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it's always been a point of wonder for me why it's so hard to actually make that extra step and go and be a patron of the arts,
Mm.
which is something that is, I think, coming back now. Maybe there's a lot of talk about that with Web3, but up until 100 years ago, an author like James Joyce or some author would have a patron, somebody who appreciated the fact that there is an artist doing the stuff that they're doing and giving them an allowance to live off, which is something that I think is all but gone these days, especially when I think about like rich benefactors being the patrons of one specific thing. So now everything is decentralized, and that's good. I want to see it coming back. And why does this happen is something that I wondered about a lot. And maybe it's because that the poet is using words and we all use words. So it's almost, like we think, what's the big deal? Like I'm using words, the poet is using words, or the writer uses words. I think that the best thing that could be done to have children appreciate and grow up to be adults that not only appreciate it on the moment where they encounter it, but really get an appreciation of even things that don't resonate with them emotionally right now, but they just see the beauty in it, is that you have to at least let children try their hand at writing, see how non-trivial it is to be able to string words together in a way that actually creates this resonance in our soul that is emotion. And then they can start appreciating how intricate, how complex the art actually is. Because I think people are very easily they're astounded when they see Lionel Messi or some football star doing things which they know they absolutely can't do, because we all play football. We all played whatever sport it was when we were small. So that's easy to appreciate, and people are happily pouring money over this, even if it's just, giving the monthly bill to the cable companies. But with writing, because it's maybe more abstract, because we all do it to a certain extent, maybe people don't recognize that these things are actually hard to make, and it doesn't open their heart as much toward the artist.
Well, actually, so if you want to get into this, I can actually talk a lot about this because, as someone who cares about this, I have also like studied this as well as I could. And I would say, there's this really funny YouTube video. I don't know if it's like a channel or something, but what they would do is they would go on Twitter and look for people who insulted. So this is in America, and it's about like American football, right? So like they would wait for someone to tweet like, oh, how did that guy miss that kick? Right? It's like a sort of like an open, like a free kick. I don't know the specifics of how American football works, but there's like a free kick of sorts, and then the guy misses it, and then like there are people who comment, oh, what a loser! How did he fail that kick? And then what they did is they went and asked those guys, like, would you like to come on our show and demonstrate for us how easy that kick is? And they got like a dozen guys, and all of them missed the kick as well.
Perfect.
So it's kind of so yeah, it's beautiful and funny, and it's like, and some of them had a sense of humor about it. They're like, oh, it's my bad day or whatever. But like, I mean, the funny thing is, I think while lots of people do appreciate that, like the top athletes are like, beyond our capabilities, a lot of people also underestimate at the same time. And I think if you try to study like, okay, where does the money come from, right? Like where, like, who is paying Messi's salary, right? Is the question, right? And I think it's really the money there comes from like the event, like so the like, so sports is a community, it's like a simulation of war, right? Sort of, and it's all of that emotional investment that people have.
Absolutely.
So even in sports, I bet if we isolate sports, so we don't even talk about poets, right? If you isolate sports, I know that, for example, in Singapore, we are horrible to our sportsmen and to our artists. But like, people like rowers, right? Like individual sports, they don't get appreciated as much as like the team sport stuff. Because with the team sport stuff, you have people buying in based on their sense of allegiance to the team. So you might almost wonder, is like, if you could find a way to bring like team allegiance to the arts, maybe. But yeah, it's and you could argue that that's probably happening in the realm of like YouTubers and podcasters, right? So if you go on Patreon and you look for who are the top 10 most patroned artists, it's most of them are like podcasters and YouTubers, and they kind of have a slightly political angle, at least like their commentary, they are doing commentary on that. And then you could be like, oh, those aren't even real artists. Like I'm 50-50 about it. I'm not gonna say that
they're just playing on the whole like tribalism thing.
Yeah.
So they are like the people who call to arms and hold the banners up and doing the marching or giving the marching orders. Yeah.
So that's very lucrative. That's generally always been very lucrative, I think. And like the challenge for a lot of artists, if you are like sophisticated enough to understand it, is to then like, are you gonna sell a little bit of your soul to exploit a little bit of that dynamic to serve your art? Can you do? Is that possible? Can you do that without without being corrupted by that process. I think there's this book by Balzac, Honoré de Balzac, and it's called Lost Illusions. I read it when I was like 20. I think because Taylor might have mentioned it in one of his books. And it's basically about this small-time poet from some part of France, like a village in France. And he wants to go to Paris, partially to impress like the local, like a lady from his local town. And then he goes and it's funny because at first it's like the local lady, she's like so beautiful and amazing. And then he goes to Paris and it's like, oh my God, all the other women are so much more beautiful than, like initially he was like writing her love poems and stuff. Then he goes there and he's like, oh wow, there's like all this glamour and splendor and like Paris is exciting. And then he goes there and he's like, okay, I'm gonna make it big as a poet in Paris. And then he goes to Paris and it's like, it turns out that there's this whole, and this is like what, 1800s maybe, and there's like this whole existing ecosystem that's like what we might today describe as like crushing capitalists and stuff, right? Like, so it's like there's like this cabal of people who write reviews for plays, and it turns out that their reviews are not honest at all. It's like all corrupt. It's like they are doing favors for the playwrights, and they're all this bootlicking and sucking up. And then there's this other small crew of poets who are like, oh, we don't care about all of that. We only care about truth and beauty. But like they are tiny, and
nobody gets to hear them.
Nobody gets to hear them, and they don't even try to reach out to the public. They just sort of like, we'll just make the best work, and we will be appreciated just because our work is so good. And they refuse to go out and engage with people, which is like, and then there's just all of these details. And when I was reading that when I was 20, I was like, holy shit, this dynamic has been playing out in human environments like for centuries. It's not new, right? So we really have to deal, and I mean, even with sports and stuff, like if you go back to like the Colosseum and all that, right, like there were all these dynamics as well, and it's just very deeply human challenges that we have to navigate. And I would say like how I would tie this back to the library ethos is that, when you appreciate how a lot of these cycles have been playing out in history for centuries and centuries, it makes us feel less alone. It makes us feel less crazy. Some people say things like, oh, politics today is like the worst it's ever been. Actually, no. If you go and read like the civil, like you get it, right? It's just things have been crazy forever.
Absolutely. I mean, really, it's like you say, it's the only reason people do that is because they haven't picked a history book in a while. But and there have been, I think, murders in Congress in the US. There have been all sorts of crazy shit that was happening in the past that we're just not aware of. That seems it seems so crazy to us today that we just assume that it never happened, because that's crazy. Just pick any history book about the 19th century to find some, assassinations in America were quite a common thing in the 19th and early 20th century of presidents. So
it's wild. And we do I think we sanitize history for the children, probably, like to teach it in schools. Like, and some of it is outrageous, and some of it is a lot of anger, a lot of the wounds are still open. Like, if in like national conflicts in regions and stuff, and so it's almost difficult to get to the truth because the textbooks like kind of like downplay the emotional. They don't want to. I guess I can understand. You don't want like a child to go to school and then read about like history and then go back home and like cry to their parents like, oh my god, like are we the oppressed, or it's all this crazy shit. But then the result is that there's like an anesthetization that happens. Like everyone just feels disconnected from their past and disconnected from the world. And then what do? You just be a consumer basically, right? So it's tricky stuff. And so part of what I would say is the library ethos is that we need sensitivity, right? We need to be able to, like, you can't just you can, but like it's not a good idea to just be like, oh well, this conflict between these two countries is because of these two things, and like it's not over yet, and we should still be. I mean, if you go on YouTube, you'll see it in the comment section, like in anything, take like Ukraine or anywhere in the world, but like Cambodia and Thailand, their borders, there's like the Vietnam and Cambodia, like everywhere, there's Korea and Japan, like people are friendly on the surface, but if you go to like the YouTube channels, you see the comments, there are also people who are very, very angry about things that happened 200-300 years ago or older. And like how do we get people to engage with the world in a way that is honest and truthful, but also kind of sensitive to all the the underlying trauma, right? It's really it's trauma, right? We are still recovering from like the traumas of World War II, World War One. You can say it's all downstream of that. And I guess if you really want to go all the way, it's like, oh,
Oh
human
yeah, who
history is the
knows?
history
I
of
mean,
trauma from.
if you look at Israel,
Yeah,
let me
exactly.
tell you, there are some conflicts that have started much long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, how much time do you have?
Exactly.
We're
Yeah.
gonna go all the way.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
just this. I have this ancient tell near my house. A tell is basically a natural hill where people could
Mm-hmm.
live on, and then through the generations, it's built up because it's just layers of villages that are each time a village is being razed and burned,
All right.
and then the next village is built a little bit higher because it's up on top of the ruins of the next. So just where I
Wow.
live is one with, I think it's either 24 or 42 layers of just
Yikes.
destruction and reconstruction, destruction and reconstruction. And yeah,
Yeah.
so it's been a while.
Intense. Intense. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm
So
I'm
it's like,
really I'm really
mhm.
interested in that, and now you've piqued my interest with my very selfish wish to see my own country doing much better in terms of
Mm,
being able to reconcile two
yeah.
sides that have been warring intensely
Mm,
for decades now. Um,
right.
yeah, so I'd like you to please go on, and maybe we can figure out a way to really move this forward. How do you deal with um, explosive topics
Yeah.
with sensitivity?
Yeah. So I will acknowledge, like, there's some privilege in just being able to have these conversations without breaking down and screaming, right? Like, it's, you have to have some economic status, right? You have to have some, all of those things. That said, I do think that what the internet allows us to do, that some people, I think a lot of people still haven't quite grasped this possibility, because the ugly side of things is so much louder, right? Like, so the latest thing that's just happening, if have you seen that Twitter Spaces are now a thing? So Twitter
Yeah,
Spaces are things that you can create, and there's like a bunch of rooms that just the titles of the rooms are very antagonistic. It's like just racial stuff, ethnic stuff. It's practically designed to outrage people, and get engagement and whatever. And that's going to be something that people will have to deal with and live with, and it's going to be a mess. And that's also gonna occupy like the bulk of attention, right? So the old news adage is, if it bleeds, it leads. Like, anything that's violent or angry or whatever, it seizes our amygdala, right? Our fear and anxiousness and whatever. But it's a big but. I think what is possible and what is slowly emerging, and it's not so exciting and sexy and dramatic, right? But like, we can make friends with people from around the world. And I do, and us having this conversation is like one tiny drop in hopefully a bigger bucket, where I think that as people increasingly have built relationships with other kind-friendly nerds from around the planet, that would form like a meshwork that, I'm not so naive as to say that this group of people will single-handedly save the world. That's like, the world's always going to be burning to some degree. But that I read this very compelling argument in this book called The User Illusion by Tor Noritranders. He's like a Danish physicist, and he started out talking about information theory, and he ended up discussing like preference cascades, and he's talking about the Cold War and nuclear disaster, and how there was a period of time where the world was truly worried that, like, tomorrow the world might end from nuclear disaster. Like, it just seemed like a possibility. Like, if you ask someone what the odds of that happening, they might say like 10%. Like, there's a 10% chance that the Soviets will launch a nuke, and then the Americans will launch a nuke back, and then it's just gonna be, everyone's gonna die in nuclear wasteland. Like, 5 to 10% chance of that happening. Kids would have these in school. They have this duck and cover
right.
drills
Yeah.
and stuff, and we stopped doing that. Even though nuclear bombs still exist, they haven't gone away. They've reduced a little bit, but it's still enough to destroy the whole world. But nobody really worries about that anymore. And the argument is that Tor made, that I agree with, is that basically, as a planet, as a species, we've been having all these conversations. Sting from the Police, the singer, he had
Mm-hmm.
a song called "I Hope the Russians Love Their Children Too." right? Like that's what like it's like between me and you, it's like we like if they love their children the way we love our children, then they won't destroy the world, right? And it's
Yep.
like that song exists and there are artists sharing and like all these cheesy things like sports games, like they playing table tennis with each other and stuff, just little ways of demonstrating common humanity and just like all of the conversation around that, like just the global consensus sort of became okay, the people across the border, they might seem insane to us, but like they are human too, right? And that just led to okay, we're probably not going to blow up the world between these two state actors. At least I think there's still some concern that like some rogue terrorist type state might be like maybe might have that chance, but like the worry that a global superpower would do something like that diminished from the sheer volume and of conversation and just all the artists and intellectuals and everybody involved were all talking about it all the time back then. Like if you read a book from the 1970s, like you will see some reference to the Cold War for sure, and some reference to a nuclear disaster and all these things. And I feel that so we are now in the we might already be, I think we basically already are in like so-called World War III, which is cultural and mimetic, and like so it's like no boots on the ground. It's just people are jostling for control of culture, like global culture and values and perspectives and so on. And some people find this very depressing, but it's way better than World War I and II, where like lives were being shredded and by the millions, which is like inconceivable now.
Yeah, I
but
think
at the same
one good example for something that, in real time I was telling myself, whoa, this is really interesting. What's going on here is Gangnam Style, right?
right,
Because
yes
this crazy Korean dude just out of nowhere is suddenly somehow breaking not just one glass ceiling, but several, getting
yeah
out Korean pop music to the
yeah
whole world. I had no idea what it was like, and everybody. So in artistic terms, I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, this is the lowest common denominator." It's like it's just trash. It's so trash that anyone can find in it. And but from another perspective, this is genius. This is exactly what's good about it, that you now realize this thing has however many billions of watches on YouTube, and you absolutely understand now that take any two factions or sides that are warring with each other, that people in both sides liked it and enjoyed it,
yeah
and it creates a common language, very, very much subconsciously. Like you don't
yeah
know, but we don't know. It's never going to be spoken about. It's never going to be calculated. How many lives, just the fact that we both saw a phenomenon like Gangnam Style and we could all relate to that on some level. This because, like you say, this is kind of creates this enmeshing effect of populations over silly things, admittedly silly
right
things, but
yeah
they're silly at the same time. It's still somehow very serious in the long run.
I agree. Same for so like Despacito hit a couple of years ago. Same thing.
Yeah.
Like most of the world doesn't know the language, but everyone knows the dance. Everyone knows the vibes, right? And I think now on TikTok, for example, the teenagers are really, again, like they might just be doing silly dances, but like it's cross cultural and they are copying each other's dance moves, and it's just there is that international sense of feeling. And again, I don't think that's gonna eradicate centuries old just trauma and injustice or all of those things. It's like we're not gonna get into that, but like the fact that people know that there are people elsewhere in the world and they have these things in common, I think it just invites a bit more humanity. And so progress is always slow and undramatic and bits and pieces. But I would, I talk with my wife about this a lot, and like in the past 20 years, like in our lifetime, like it feels like globally, like women's, just there are certain things about the fundamental experiences of women that are being appreciated even by like the very conservative, like so in American politics sense or whatever, right? Like just the very conservative right stuff, like they argue about like the politics of abortion and all those things. Like some people still feel very strongly about it both ways, but things like issues of consent, that has changed dramatically in our lifetime. Like when we were kids, it's like there were rape jokes on TV, and it's like it's fine. It's like if you watch sitcoms from like 20 years ago. Like I think it's I mean even a conservative person who's like very traditionalist, fundamentalist or whatever, like if you're going to have a daughter like this year versus 10 years ago versus 20 years ago, like it just feels like a better time. There's more opportunity, more understanding, and of course the work's not done. Like there's a lot more to do, and this is true for every domain of injustice, every domain of whatever. But I think we just need a lot more sane conversation and people who are trying to hold the center, sort of, which is like almost sounds I don't know. It's almost like sometimes I joke that we need like a radical centrism, but like centrists are never radical because if you're gonna be radical, it'll be like radically like yeah. So the radical centrism is like like
Well,
screw
the
everyone.
funny thing is that if you're a centrist, if you're a true centrist, or to me, if you just tell me like a rational person, to me that's
Right.
centrism is being perfectly rational. Not to say
Yeah.
that you're giving up on your emotions or anything like that. That's, I think, is a misunderstanding of rationality.
Yeah.
But if
Agreed.
you're rational, what happens is that you are not radical, you're a centrist, but in every kind of argument or exchange you might find with somebody who is radical, they're always going to take you.
Yeah.
They're always going to call you a radical, just
Mm.
because you might be on their side from a lot of perspectives, but at the first sign of disagreement, because you're holding your
Right.
ground, because this thing is rational and true. Um, so just saying the neutral thing it just gets them to think that you're on a different side than them. So in that sense,
Yeah.
centrists are always radical in one-on-one
Right. Right.
interactions.
That's true. Yeah, and they're underrepresented, and yeah, it's there's like an optical illusion when it comes to the media in general. And when I say media, I don't mean like journalism specifically, or like just in even just if you run a business, for example, like a cafe or something, like the most reviews you're gonna get are negative most of the time, unless you like really specifically ask people to do leave good reviews and stuff. But like
Yeah.
like people who have a good experience, they don't think about it, they just move on. Whereas people who have a bad experience, they're like, oh, people must know how bad this was. So it's like there's this just bad news is always kind of overrepresented, and that can have a real effect on your psyche if you're reading the news all the time and it just everything just looks bad. Like you never see in the news today a guy had a decent day and it was nice and he spent it with his family, or
Yeah.
it's just like that's most people, most of the world. And I love reading about travelers. There's this TV show called Somebody Feed Phil. I think he's been to Israel as well. He's been to Singapore, he's been to Israel, he's been around. And it's basically he just goes. He was the guy who came up with the TV show Everybody Loves Raymond. And so this is like almost like his half retired project where he goes around the world and he just eats with friends, and they show him around, and it's just they invite him to their homes and it's their families, and you just really see like everyone everywhere in the world kind of wants, they just want to live a decent life. They want their children to be better off. They want to be, they want to work, and they want to have like some downtime, have some fun, have some good food. Like it's really, and there's this great quote from an Iranian author. I think I can never remember her name. Something Satrapi. I think I can't remember. Marjorie something. She said, she's talking. So she's an Iranian and she's talking to Americans, and she's saying that the difference between me and my government is bigger than the difference between me and you. The difference between you and your government is bigger than the difference between you and me. And our governments are very much the same. It's kind of like, so she said we can understand each other perfectly as people, as long as we are not like, we don't get trapped in the sort of the frames that are used in political conflicts. Like there's so much you can agree on, for starters, right? Like you both enjoy these movies, you both love your kids, you both like dogs, you both don't like something. Like it's all of this human experience that you have in common. And then it's just like, because it's politically inconvenient a certain way for certain people in power, like people get swept up in that. I think there was that old quote from I think it was one of the from the like Nuremberg war trials. I think somebody saying something like, it's the same everywhere in the world. You just tell the people that they are under attack from some foreign adversary, and then that if they don't support like militant action, they are they are being defeatist or they are giving in to whatever,
Yeah.
and then you can just beat everyone up into a fury. And that's like it's been true of like almost every part of the world for all of human history. And I guess the challenge is, can we try again? I don't think we can remove that impulse, but can we sort of temper it at least with with a mesh network of sane minds around the planet? Like, just I think it can happen. I think we should try. And it's my instinct.
I think it's a work in progress that maybe we two are optimists, but I do think it's happening, because something we have to account for the reduction in violence in recent decades somehow, and I think
Right.
that's a fair analysis of what's going on. Increased connectivity equals a reduction in violence. I think that's definitely true. So would it be fair to say, if I more explicitly connect the library ethos with that whole idea of creating a global community, is that if each of us adopted the mindset where it is valuable to document our lives and share it, this basically creates the basis of it. We don't know if it's valuable per se, and that, I think it connects with your point of making it available for anyone for free. It's not about like monetary value, but the value of it is that many lives of many regular people around the world are accessible through the click of a button, and then people can understand unequivocally that other people are a lot more like them than they thought, basically.
Yeah, very much so. Yes. So in that regard, it's unfashionable to be like pro tech, like Facebook and Instagram and all that. But I think, if you ask me honestly, like if I zoom out and see my historical view, I think those things are good for the species. Like, it's good that people can publish information directly about their. I mean, so there's things like people saying, oh, Instagram causes body image issues, but that was also true of like magazines like a decade ago. And
Absolutely.
with the magazines, you couldn't like fight back by sharing your own story, whereas now that's possible. And so that's I think that in the long run, this will be, especially in like the developing world, like well, there's also it's true that the developing world, there's people who don't have media literacy yet, and that allows like genocidal fascist types to really abuse the tools of disseminating information. They can spread misinformation just as well. But like I honestly do believe that the way to fight disinformation is with better information, right? We need moms and dads and uncles and aunties to show up and tell story, and like just people need to show up. Like, you can't just, the problem, if there's someone posting bad speech and then you like introduce a censor of some kind, like that censor will then end up being accountable in like not accountable in some ways, and then they will abuse their power, and it's like, who watches the watchers? And so the answer to who watches the watchers should be everybody, right? It takes the whole village to see what's going on, right? And even then, I know that not everyone is equally suited to these things, and so we need community leaders to kind of encourage the community. Like, this holds true from a small community all the way to the planet, right? We need all hands on deck, basically.
Yeah, and I think also that without Facebook or Instagram, which is Facebook, and all these platforms, Twitter, there's, first of all, I think some of them are better suited for an individual experience, which can hedge against all the violence and stuff. So I can testify that Twitter, actually it's quite easy not to go to these places where all the shitty stuff is going on. Of course, in my trending suggestions, for me as an Israeli, there's always Nazis and
Right.
the conflict. But if I stay out of it,
I set my location to be Aland Islands, which is like some obscure place in like Norway or like this, and there's nothing trending there. So there's these little things that you learn to do, like you set your location somewhere weird.
Oh,
you can set
that's
your location
perfect.
you can set your location as like Japan, and then everything is just in Japanese, so you can't even read it. So it's
Oh, that's
so these
amazing.
these little things that you can do to kind of manage your information feeds, right? Like, so it is unfair that like trends just get thrown at you without your say. Like you should be able to define these things. But yeah, and like we should be increasingly having more conversations with kids and with the public about what it means to receive information. Sorry, I got excited. Yeah, you're saying?
No, yeah. Well, I was gonna say that, Facebook and these things that have definitely shown their dark side, and they have a dark side. Now we see an evolution towards Web3, where these things might be even less centralized. The platform itself is going to be less centralized. It remains to be seen what it grows into, but there is always a subset of people who are truly unhappy with the divisiveness they find on these platforms, and maybe we can create better things in the future with those technologies which are just now starting um, to form. So yeah, I think the Web3 technologies are definitely going to show us that a lot of people are much kinder and are totally disillusioned with the platforms that we've now learned to hate, like you say, Facebook and Twitter and so on. I also think it was a net positive in the long run, because you want that connectivity. First, there are always going to be people who are going to fear people who are not of the same color as them or not of the same opinion. But in the end, it's that connectivity that you've been mentioning. We would also not have the possibility to have a Gangnam style event in the future. And even in Web3, I can see that there is a lot of place for scams alongside good things. So obviously, it's technology. It's always going to be neutral, but it does give the possibility of really good ideas spreading much faster and not just getting lost or staying obscure forever.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So I was reading about LEDs just out of curiosity. Like I can't remember why, but I was like just curious to understand LEDs. And it turns out there was this guy. His name was like Losev Ola something, Losev, and he basically invented LEDs like 20, like a long time before LEDs became commonplace. So he was around during Einstein's time, and he actually wrote a letter to Einstein hoping to like have a correspondence. But Einstein was so busy and he got so many letters he ignored it. But Losev invented LEDs. Like he could have kind of jump started that whole industry by several decades, I think. But like he just didn't have friends, he didn't have connections, and so he died in obscurity like during the war and stuff. And it's so sad. Like humanity could have advanced a technology by a couple of decades if this guy had the right connections or the right, like something like Web3, I think, where you can post something, and if people have an incentive to kind of pass along good ideas, like that would be really exciting, like something like that. I hope that things like that can happen more. And I mean, I have been trying to put forth a solution to that, like what I call the Losev problem, right? Which is like, how do we just find these really underconnected people who are disproportionately valuable, and how do we share their gifts with everybody else? I do think that if I have like a librarian in like what I call a librarian, like in every major city in the world, then anybody who wants to connect can know, okay, I need to find one of these people, and then I talk to them, and if the idea is good, they'll share with everyone else, and then it's like this mesh. Like I'm already doing that informally on Twitter and so on, and like yeah, the Web3 dynamic, I think I'm not precisely sure how exactly it's going to play out, but it seems to be in that spirit as well. Like people can really pass stuff along, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I was just talking to someone who is more well versed in everything Web3 than I am. And he basically said that right now, one of the most needed jobs in Web3 is people who are able to have a lot of conversations with other people, to be exactly that, like hubs of information. Yeah, and going back to the story of the Library of Alexandria, how many amazing writings have just been there. They had one or two copies there, and that's it in that library. When this was gone, everything in it was gone forever. I often wonder how, I ponder on the fact that we're so lucky to have, I don't know, Plato's writing in circulation or any of these, because initially they were so fragile. They were so vulnerable. It was
Right.
literally a person writing on a piece of parchment or a clay
Right.
tablet, and if that
Yeah.
parchment 10 minutes later something happened to it, he spilled his coffee or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
on it, that's it. It was like, so we're
Yeah.
so lucky to have things. Whereas today, you write a blog post, the worst thing that can happen is that your computer crashes before it's saved, and even that doesn't really happen anymore because it's
Yeah.
automatically saved. And as soon as you're
Right.
done, you just press the key and it's out there.
Yeah.
Very likely not to be taken down anytime soon.
Yeah. And even the story of like Aristotle in particular, I think is very moving to me because first of all, here's this, so Plato and Socrates and Aristotle from the academy, they were doing their thing, which is already very precious that they did it. And then they, like when their society declined, like their works spread like south to like Baghdad, right? And then there was a period of time where I think the medieval Christian in that part of Europe, they were just very against these
Mm-hmm.
like early Greek insights and philosophy because it conflicted with their teachings. But like it's like they passed the torch down south, right? Sort of, and then like in Baghdad there was the Islamic Golden Age, and there was just people inventing algebra and alchemy and all these things. And then Baghdad was sacked by the Mongols, but like they managed, some people managed to keep those flames afloat, and they passed it on to the Italian Renaissance. And I just imagine it, and it's like these people carrying the torch of the light of human consciousness, and they're
Yes.
refusing to let it die out. Like they were like, and people gave their lives for this, so that we their descendants and successors can continue to enjoy our predecessors' work. And so I feel honestly like a spiritual connection with this. Like I really feel like these are my people, like
Mm-hmm.
there's this great line where when Pythagoras, I think, was it Pythagoras? Either Pythagoras or who's the other guy? I always confuse the two of them. Archimedes.
Uh-huh.
Might be Archimedes, might be Pythagoras. One of the two of them was killed by a Roman. And the last thing he said was, "Don't disturb my circles." I can't remember which one of them it is. I think it was Archimedes. No,
Pythagoras is more
Pythagoras.
ancient, I believe. So I don't think it's
Yeah, so
Pythagoras because he's ancient.
probably. Let
Mm-hmm.
me just Google this so that I get it right. You can edit it if you want. Don't disturb my circles. It's Archimedes, allegedly.
Yeah.
It's in Syracuse. Yeah. So he said his last words before being killed by a Roman soldier was, "Don't disturb my circles." It's just, and I just find it poetic. I mean, I don't even know if it's true, right? It could be a story, right? But it's a great story. It's just this idea that there are people who care about knowledge so much that they're willing to die for it, basically, and to share that knowledge with other humans. I just find that so meaningful. I think when I was a child, to some degree, like some of the people around me and like my family, I mean, so thankfully my parents also loved books, so they couldn't, but they still wanted me to be like, in their hearts they wanted me to be like an engineer or like just make money, right? Like become a doctor,
Doctor or
lawyer, something that
something.
make, right, the classic parents who want their children to be economically striving. But I would say Singapore, like the Singaporean context that I grew up in, and this is changing now, like when I'm in my 30s. But like when I was young, it was very much don't care about frivolous pursuits like arts or even like when I was younger, like even computer science and stuff, it just seemed kind of frivolous, and they would say like focus on what will make you money. And
Yeah.
but now but yeah,
Now it's
it's
like, you
just so
idiot. Why didn't you learn about computers when you were 7?
exactly, yeah,
Because you
exactly.
wanted me to be a doctor.
Exactly. That's so true. Yeah. That changed dramatically during our lifetime. And now you'll see those same parents like trying to be like, how can I get my kids to learn to code? Like leave your kids alone, they'll figure it out,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's what was I saying? Yeah, it's so nice to have the impulses of your heart be like validated in these such long, grand, ancient ways, right? So it's not just I have this weird compulsion and it's almost like something wrong with me compared to like my friends who don't care about libraries and books. Whereas I see that like Carl Sagan has this quote about how books are proof that humans can work magic, because you open a book and you read a few squiggles and symbols on printed paper, and suddenly you're in the mind of someone from thousands of years ago. Like, wow, that's literally magic. And yeah, I think that if the species can be wooed, right, with the magic of our heritage and our inheritance, like I think that might persuade more and more people to step away from like this angry yelling. And yeah, it's a more beautiful, more poetic, conversational world. That's what I want to see. That's what to me like the library ethos is about.
Absolutely. I mean, it's wonderful for me to think, because I think it's such an optimistic outlook, and such a uh, major encouragement for people. Sometimes it's overwhelming. I'm one podcaster out of 2 million or whatever. Anybody who has a blog is one blogger out of many millions, and sometimes it's hard, and you have to think about, oh, if I put my stuff out there, is anybody even writing this? Is it reaching people? It can be overwhelming, and I myself sometimes am thinking this about other people. But I like the fact that you're saying it's like it all has a place there. It plays its part. The person who needs to get to a certain blog post gets there somehow, and even the practice of having a library ethos for yourself and participating in
Right.
this global connectivity project, almost, as you're putting it.
Yeah.
In other words. Um, is something that we should all strive for, and I love it. It's a really beautiful message. Do you have any other ideas about how to is it basically a gentle call to arms for people to share more, to even if it's something as small as their likes and dislikes about things?
Yeah. I actually I have a bit more to say about so
Mm-hmm.
even blogging and podcasting and all of these things, while there are millions of creators, right? So there are billions of people, and I do think that we are still in the very, very early days of what's happening, like the revolution that's going on. And if you and again, like history is full of lessons. If you read about like the early days of electricity or steam power, like it takes decades for that stuff to really spread into the culture. Like even like commercial flight was available, and it took decades for people to kind of adapt industries around to it. And I would say that anybody who is blogging, vlogging, podcasting today, like they might currently feel like they don't have much of an audience, but like if you continue to persist with it, like, and if you can keep at it for like 5 years, 10 years, and not necessarily like every single day for 10 years, but I think like every month even, right? If you have that kind of consistent, persistent pursuit, I think there's something about the space, about the regularity of a thing that makes it more and more valuable as it goes on. And like, so if you find a blog and someone has been blogging one blog post every month for 10 years, like that like becomes very, very valuable as a record of sorts. And it's one of the crazy things about the way human attention seems to work is that they will build 90% of their audience in like the final 5% of the time that they're in. So like even on Twitter, like I think the first 10 years I was on Twitter, I had like 1,000-ish followers. And then after that, it's like a new 1,000 followers every month almost. It's very counter to human intuition, like just the
Right.
scale that we are operating on, right? And this is one thing where if you read history, you'll get the wrong idea, because historically, like nobody has ever had the opportunity to reach the entire planet. Like this is 10, 20 years old at max. And we haven't even, the analogy I've used sometimes is that the internet is like the electric guitar before Jimi Hendrix showed up. And so like when the electric guitar was invented, it was basically conceived of as it's like a guitar, but you can plug it in and it's louder. And in some ways it's worse
Yeah.
because like the sound audio quality is whatever. But like because people were conceiving of it as it's like a guitar but louder, they didn't think of just messing with it in crazy ways. And Jimi Hendrix came along and he's like, oh, you can do wild, crazy shit with it. And it feels like social media is still, people are still thinking about it as in terms of legacy media, in terms of TV and radio and all those things. And the really amazing thing that you can do with social media is that you can really zoom deep into people's lives and talk to people for hours and hours. And like that's the thing that we are only just beginning to appreciate. And yeah, so our thinking is very much informed by the past, and there are all these new ways that we can open up that we haven't yet. Some people are already doing it, so the future is already here. It's unevenly distributed. Some people are already doing it, but there is a lot of room, I think, and I think people are always hungry for authentic voices. People are always like, so even when there's like tons of blogs and YouTube channels and podcasts and whatever, like a lot of it will come across as kind of forced, kind of fake, kind of, and some of that is just, beginners anxiety or nervousness or trying to do what you think the algorithm wants or what you think the market wants. But what people really, really want, in my experience, is that they want someone who's telling the truth, someone who's just really speaking the truth of their experience and their feelings. And I think that is always compelling to people. And like, so I always encourage people to try and share. And it can be scary, right? It can be scary, it can be hard, it can be, but it's worthwhile, right? Like from my point of view, it's like it's almost the only thing worth doing. I get dramatic. I grew up reading books, feeling like, I remember being a teenager and I was feeling like suicidal because I felt like life was so full of bullshit and like jobs and you're gonna wear a tie and like that's not how I wanted my life to be. So I wanted to get rid of that life. That was the feeling. And yeah, so I'm still very dramatic. I'm still like, like I want to try and find a way to make a living as a writer. So I did spend a few years working a traditional marketing job, and like I had great colleagues, great boss, whatever. But the whole time I was always like, I want something more to my life. I want my life to be meaningful and to be like just to feel like it matters in ways that I think is important to me. So I mean, to anybody listening, I would say you don't necessarily need to like don't feel like don't overfit the advice. Don't be like, oh, this guy sounds like he's happy and he is talking about libraries, so I should become a librarian. Like, no, not necessarily. You should figure out what it is that makes your heart aflame, and like maybe at first, because you have a job and you have bills and you have kids and whatever, you can't spend all your time doing that, but try and spend like half an hour a week on the thing that you love, right? And then try to expand that more and more slowly. And then that will try and invite other people to do it with you, try and join other people who are doing it. And then you can expand that more and more. And I think that ties back to, Gangnam Style and just all the things that we want to see people really living their lives with joy. And I think joy is like the antidote to like just hate and anger and all those things.
Yeah, that's so lovely. I love every bit of what you're saying, and the optimistic tone, and and this amazing call to action for people to connect more and do more things out of joy and enjoyment. Yeah, this has been great, Visa. I enjoyed this very much, and this hour just flew by me. I'd like you to share with listeners some contact details or where to follow you and your ideas.
All right. Yeah. So you can just Google my username, which is, so my name is Visagan. The username is VISAKANV. So if you search that, you'll find my Twitter, you'll find my YouTube channel. So the best places to catch up with my stuff are my Twitter and my YouTube channel. I am working on a book. I have two books. So my first book is called Friendly Ambitious Nerd. You'll find it on my Twitter and my website everywhere. And my second book, which I'm gonna be releasing like tomorrow or the day after, like very, very soon, it's called Introspect. So Friendly Ambitious Nerd is a lot of what I have described around the library ethos and connecting with people and trying to just be a nerd at scale and make friends and stuff. And the second book is called Introspect. And Introspect is more about, sorting out your inner conflict and so that you can be a person of joy, right? Like, that's what I'm working on right now.
That's amazing. So obviously I'll link to those in the show notes. And
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on again, and look forward to getting in touch.
Thank you for having me. See you around.